Adrian Brooks woke up and felt the warmth of someone's body pressed against his back. His heart stopped. He turned slowly, and there she was. Eleanor Hayes, his boss, in his bed, her blouse half unbuttoned, his shirt missing, an empty whiskey bottle on the nightstand. Neither of them remembered a single thing. But here's what made it worse. Eleanor's father, Walter Hayes, was the man who destroyed Adrian's life 7 years ago. The man who took his career, his marriage, and nearly his sanity. And now that man's daughter was lying in his bed, and Adrian had no idea how she got there. What happened that night would change everything. But the truth was far more dangerous than either of them could imagine. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You don't want to miss what comes next. Adrian Brooks didn't move. He lay there, his eyes locked on the ceiling, his chest rising and falling in shallow, controlled breaths. The weight beside him shifted. A strand of dark hair fell across his pillow. Hair that didn't belong to him, didn't belong to anyone who should have been in this bed. He turned his head, slowly, like a man bracing for a bullet. Eleanor Hayes. She was curled on her side, one arm tucked beneath the pillow, her lips slightly parted. Her charcoal blazer hung from the corner of his dresser. Her heels, black, expensive, the kind that cost more than his monthly rent, sat neatly by the door, as if someone had placed them there with care. Adrian sat up. His hands were shaking. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." He looked down at himself. No shirt. His belt was unbuckled. The room smelled like whiskey, and something floral, her perfume maybe. An empty bottle of Maker's Mark sat on the nightstand next to his phone, which showed 14 missed calls, all from the same number, all from last night. He grabbed his phone and scrolled. The calls started at 9:47 p.m. The last one came in at 1:12 a.m. He didn't remember answering any of them. Eleanor stirred. Adrian's throat went dry. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, planted his feet on the cold floor, and stood up. He needed distance. He needed air. He needed to figure out what in God's name happened. The hallway was quiet. Sophie's door was closed, thank God. His 7-year-old daughter was still asleep, oblivious to whatever disaster had unfolded in the next room. Adrian pressed his forehead against the wall and closed his eyes. Think, think, think. He remembered the office. He remembered staying late. He remembered Eleanor walking into the conference room around 8 o'clock, her face tight, her voice clipped. "We need to talk about the Whitfield account," she had said. And after that, nothing. Fragments, a parking garage, her car, his kitchen table, glasses clinking. Her laugh unexpected, warm, completely unlike the Eleanor Hayes he'd known for the past 3 months. Then darkness. Adrian. Her voice hit him like cold water. He turned. She was standing in the doorway of his bedroom. Barefoot, her blouse wrinkled, her eyes wide with the kind of confusion that mirrored his own. "What?" She looked down at herself, then at him, then back at the room. "What happened?" "I was hoping you could tell me." She pressed her fingers to her temples. "I remember. The office. The Whitfield files. We were going over the projections. And then what?" "I don't know." Her voice cracked. "I don't remember." They stood there, separated by 6 feet of hallway and a silence so thick it felt like concrete. "Did we—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "I don't know," Adrian said. And he meant it, every word. Eleanor leaned against the doorframe. For a moment, she didn't look like the VP of Hayes Urban Group. She didn't look like the woman who ran department meetings with surgical precision, who wore authority the way other women wore jewelry. She looked scared. "My car," she said suddenly. "Where's my car?" "I don't know." "My phone? Where's my phone?" "I don't know that either." She ran her hands through her hair. "This can't be happening." "It's happening. Adrian, If anyone finds out, if my father finds out, your father. Adrian's jaw tightened. The name hit a nerve so deep it made his vision blur. Let's not talk about your father right now. Eleanor caught the shift in his tone. She tilted her head, studying him. What's that supposed to mean? It means exactly what I said. Adrian. Daddy. They both froze. Sophie stood at the end of the hallway in her pink pajamas, clutching a stuffed rabbit, her brown eyes blinking with sleep. She looked at Adrian, then at Eleanor, then back at Adrian. Who's that lady? Adrian crossed the hallway in 3 strides and knelt in front of his daughter. Hey, sweetheart. Good morning. This is someone from Daddy's work. Sophie peered around him at Eleanor. Did she have a sleepover? Adrian's stomach dropped. Something like that. How about some pancakes? You want pancakes? With chocolate chips. With chocolate chips. Sophie smiled and padded toward the kitchen, the rabbit dragging behind her. Adrian watched her go, his chest aching with something he couldn't name. Guilt, maybe. Fear. The desperate need to keep this child's world safe from the wreckage of his own. He stood and turned back to Eleanor. You need to go. I know. Before she starts asking more questions. I said I know. Eleanor pushed off the doorframe and walked back into the bedroom. She grabbed her blazer, slipped on her heels, and found her phone wedged between the mattress and the headboard. She checked the screen and her face went pale. What? Adrian asked. My father called me. Twice. At 11:30 last night. Did you answer? I don't know. She stared at the phone like it was a loaded weapon. There's a voicemail. Play it later. Not here. She looked up at him. Adrian, whatever happened last night. We'll figure it out, but not now. Not with Sophie 20 feet away, making pancake requests. Eleanor nodded. She moved toward the front door, then stopped. I need to ask you something. What? Why does your face change every time I mention my father? Adrian held her gaze. The question hung between them like smoke. He could feel the old wound opening, the one he'd spent 7 years trying to seal shut. Walter Hayes. The name alone was enough to make his hands curl into fists. That's a conversation for another day, he said. Is it though? Eleanor, go. She held his stare for 3 full seconds. Then she turned open the door and walked out into the early morning light. Adrian watched her cross the small yard, watched her pull out her phone and call what he assumed was a cab, watched her stand at the curb, looking lost in a neighborhood she'd probably never set foot in before. He closed the door and leaned against it. What have you done? Brooks, what I met. Bitu. The pancakes were burning. Adrian could smell it, but couldn't bring himself to care. He stood at the stove, spatula in hand, staring at nothing, while Sophie sat at the kitchen table drawing pictures with a crayon that was too short for her fingers. Daddy, the pancakes are black. I know, baby. Daddy's making a new batch. He scraped the charred mess into the trash and poured fresh batter onto the griddle. His phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at the screen. Eleanor. We need to talk. Today. He didn't respond. Another buzz. Eleanor. I listened to my father's voicemail. It's about you. His hand tightened around the spatula. He set it down, picked up the phone, and typed 3 words. What did he say? The reply came fast. My father wants to meet you. Adrian stared at the message until the screen went dark. The words burned into his retinas like a brand. My father wants to meet you. 7 years ago, Walter Hayes had already met him. 7 years ago, Walter Hayes had sat across a conference table and signed the order that eliminated Adrian's entire department, 43 people gone overnight. Adrian had been the department head. He'd been the one who had to tell every single person. He'd been the last one out. No. The fallout had been total. Without a job, the bills piled up. Without money, the fight started. Without peace, his wife Maria packed a bag one Tuesday morning and drove away. 3 weeks later, she called from her sister's house in Portland. "I can't do this anymore, Adrian." "Maria, please. I love you, but I can't watch you disappear." 6 months later, she was dead. A car accident on I-84 during a rainstorm. The police said she lost control. Adrian always wondered if she'd already lost control long before that night, if the weight of their broken life had been pressing on her long before the road did. He'd raised Sophie alone since she was 11 months old. No family nearby, no safety net, just a man and his daughter against a world that had already shown him how cruel it could be. And now Walter Hayes wanted to meet him. Adrian flipped the pancakes, golden brown, perfect. He slid them onto Sophie's plate and watched her face light up. "These are the best ones, Daddy." "Yeah." He forced a smile. "Good." His phone buzzed again. "Eleanor. He knows who you are. He's known for weeks." Adrian set the phone face down on the counter. His appetite was gone. He dropped Sophie at school at 8:15. She kissed his cheek, grabbed her backpack, and ran toward the entrance without looking back. The casual fearlessness of a child who had no idea how fragile the world really was. Adrian sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, running through every possible scenario. Walter Hayes knew who he was. That meant Walter knew that his daughter's new project lead, the man she'd been working closely with for 3 months, was the same man whose life he'd dismantled in 2019, and Walter wanted a meeting. Why guilt unlikely? Men like Walter Hayes didn't feel guilt. They felt strategy. Control more likely. Walter probably saw Adrian as a threat, a loose end from a past decision that could embarrass the company if it ever came to light. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Maybe Walter had seen the way Eleanor looked at Adrian during meetings. Maybe he'd noticed the way her voice softened when she said his name. Maybe this wasn't about business at all. Adrian pulled out of the parking lot and drove to the office. Hayes Urban Group occupied the top 4 floors of a glass tower downtown. Adrian had worked there for exactly 91 days. He'd taken the job because he needed the money, because Sophie needed new shoes and the rent was going up, and pride doesn't feed a 7-year-old. He hadn't known, not at first, that the company was owned by the same man who'd destroyed him. By the time he found out, he was already 3 weeks in, already committed, already tangled. He'd told himself it didn't matter. That was a lie and he knew it. But he'd become very good at lying to himself. It was the only way to survive. The elevator opened on the 14th floor. Adrian stepped out and nearly collided with Ray Dawson, his only real friend at the company, a stocky, loudmouthed project manager who said exactly what everyone else was thinking. "Whoa, Brooks, you look like you slept in a dumpster." "Thanks, Ray. Seriously, man, you okay? You left in a hurry last night. Eleanor was looking for you." Adrian stopped walking. "She found me." Ray raised an eyebrow. "Found you how?" "Don't ask." "Oh, I'm asking." "Ray." Adrian lowered his voice. "Not now." Ray studied him for a moment, then held up his hands. "Fine. But whatever's going on, be careful. That woman's last name is Hayes, and in this building, that name is the law." Adrian knew. God, he knew. Yes. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop. The Whitfield account files were still on his screen from last night. Spreadsheets, projections, a half-written email to the client. He tried to focus. The numbers blurred together. At 9:30, his office phone rang. "Adrian Brooks." "It's Eleanor. Come to conference room B, now." The line went dead. He sat there for a full minute before standing up. Conference room B had glass walls and a long mahogany table that could seat 20. Eleanor was alone, standing at the far end, her arms crossed. She'd changed clothes since this morning. New blouse, different heels, hair pulled back tight. The armor was back on. Adrian closed the door behind him. "What's this about?" "Sit down." "I'd rather stand." She exhaled. "Fine. I'll get to it." She placed her phone on the table and slid it toward him. "Listen to this." She tapped play. Walter Hayes's voice filled the room, deep measured, the kind of voice that was used to being obeyed. "Eleanor, I know who Adrian Brooks is. I've known since the day you hired him. We need to talk about this. Call me back, tonight." The recording ended. Adrian stared at the phone. "He knew," Eleanor said. "This whole time he knew." "And he let me stay?" "Yes." "Why?" Eleanor shook her head. "That's what I want to find out." Adrian pulled out a chair and sat down. His legs felt heavy. "What exactly do you know about what your father did in 2019? "I know there were layoffs, restructuring. It was before I joined the company full-time." "Restructuring." Adrian let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Is that what he called it?" "Adrian. He gutted an entire department, 43 people, no warning, no severance, no transition plan. He did it on a Thursday afternoon and had security escort everyone out by 5 o'clock. I was the last one. I had to watch every single person walk out with a box and a look on their face like they'd been slapped." Eleanor sat down across from him. Her expression shifted, something cracking beneath the surface. "I didn't know the details." "Nobody did. That was the point. Your father buried it. Brand new division name, new leadership team. By the time the press got wind of it, the story was old news. But for the people who lived it..." Adrian's voice caught. He paused, breathed, continued. "For the people who lived it, the story never ended. What happened to you? Everything fell apart. No job, no prospects, no references, because your father made sure of that. He blacklisted anyone who tried to speak up. I spent 8 months unemployed. My wife left. 6 months after that, she died in a car accident." The room went silent. Eleanor pressed her hand flat against the table, as if steadying herself. "Adrian, I didn't..." "I know you didn't. That's not why I'm telling you." "Then why?" "Because you asked me to meet your father, and I need you to understand what you're asking." Eleanor's eyes glistened. She looked away toward the glass wall, toward the city skyline that bore her family's name on 3 different buildings. "I'm asking because I think there's more to this than either of us knows," she said quietly. "My father doesn't do anything without a reason. If he let you stay, if he's asking to meet you now, there's something else going on. Or he's cleaning up a mess. Maybe. But don't you want to know which one it is?" Adrian looked at her. Really looked at her, past the title, past the last name, past the glass walls and expensive shoes. He saw a woman trying to hold together 2 truths that didn't fit: love for her father and the knowledge of what he'd done. He'd worn that same expression for 7 years. He knew exactly how heavy it was. "I'll think about it," he said. "That's all I'm asking." He stood, walked toward the door, stopped. "Eleanor." "Yes. Last night, whatever happened, I need you to know something." She waited. "I don't remember it, but I'm not sorry you were there." He opened the door and walked out. Eleanor sat alone in the conference room, her father's voicemail still glowing on the screen of her phone, and for the first time in her adult life, she didn't know whose side she was on. That night, Adrian sat on the edge of Sophie's bed reading her favorite book for the 100th time. She fell asleep on page 12 the way she always did, her small hand resting on his wrist. He closed the book, set it on the nightstand, pulled the blanket up to her chin. "I'm going to protect you," he whispered, "no matter what." He walked to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and stood at the window. The city lights blurred through the glass. Somewhere out there, Walter Hayes was sitting in a penthouse making plans. And somewhere between that penthouse and this small apartment, Eleanor Hayes was caught in the middle, carrying her father's name and Adrian's truth in the same pair of hands. Adrian set the glass down. He picked up his phone and typed a message. "I'll meet him." He hit send before he could change his mind. 3 seconds later, Eleanor replied. Saturday. His office. 10 a.m. Adrian turned off his phone, sat down in the dark, and listened to the silence of his apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft rhythm of Sophie's breathing down the hall, the steady beat of his own heart reminding him that he was still alive, still standing still here. Whatever Walter Hayes wanted, Adrian would face it the same way he'd faced everything else on his feet, with his daughter's name carved into every reason he had left to fight. Saturday came too fast. Adrian stood in front of his bathroom mirror at 6:45 a.m., buttoning a shirt he hadn't worn in 3 years. It was the same shirt he'd worn to Maria's funeral, white, pressed, the collar still stiff. He didn't know why he'd chosen it. Maybe because it was the only dress shirt he owned that didn't remind him of Hayes Urban Group. Or maybe because some part of him wanted to walk into Walter Hayes's office carrying the ghost of everything that man had cost him. Sophie sat on the kitchen counter, swinging her legs, eating cereal with her fingers. "Daddy, why are you dressed like that?" "I have a meeting." "On Saturday." "Yeah, baby, on Saturday." "That's dumb?" Adrian almost smiled. "Yeah, it is." He called Mrs. Patterson next door and asked if she could watch Sophie for a few hours. Mrs. Patterson, 72, widowed and sharper than most people half her age, took one look at Adrian's face and said, "You look like you're walking into a courtroom." "Feels like it," Adrian said. "Whatever it is, don't let them see you sweat." He kissed Sophie on the forehead, grabbed his keys, and walked out the door. The drive downtown took 35 minutes. Adrian spent every one of them arguing with himself. He could turn around. He could call Eleanor and cancel. He could keep his head down, do his job, collect his paycheck, and pretend that Walter Hayes was just a name on a building instead of the man who had dismantled his entire life. But he couldn't, and he knew it. Because the moment Eleanor had texted those words, "My father wants to meet you," the past had kicked down the door and walked right back in. There was no pretending anymore. There was no distance left to keep. He parked in the garage beneath the Hayes building and sat in his car for 5 minutes. His phone buzzed. "Eleanor." "I'm in the lobby. Take the private elevator on the east side. I'll meet you there." Adrian got out, locked the car, and walked toward the building. His footsteps echoed in the concrete garage, each one louder than the last, like a countdown. Eleanor was waiting by a brushed steel elevator door that Adrian had never noticed before. She looked different today. No blazer, no heels. She wore a simple black dress and flat shoes, her hair down around her shoulders. She looked younger, softer, like a woman who hadn't slept. "You came," she said. "I said I would. I know. I just wasn't sure you meant it." "I don't say things I don't mean, Eleanor." She held his gaze for a beat, then pressed the elevator button. The doors opened immediately. They stepped inside. Eleanor pressed the button for the 32nd floor, a floor Adrian didn't even know existed. The elevator hummed as it climbed. Neither of them spoke. Adrian watched the numbers rise on the digital panel, each one ticking higher like a pulse. At 28, Eleanor said, "There are things you need to know before we walk in." "Like what?" "My father isn't well. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 4 months ago. Stage 3. He's been doing treatment, but—" She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "He doesn't have a lot of time." Adrian stared at the elevator doors. He didn't know what to feel. The man who destroyed his life was dying. He'd imagined this scenario 100 times, Walter Hayes brought, low, humbled, broken the way Adrian had been broken. But now that it was real, the satisfaction he'd expected wasn't there. There was just a hollow ache, like pressing on a bruise that had never fully healed. "Is that why he wants to see me?" Adrian asked, clearing his conscience. "I don't know. He hasn't told me everything. He just said it was important, that it couldn't wait." The elevator stopped. The doors opened onto a floor that looked nothing like the rest of the building. No cubicles, no glass walls, no corporate art. Just a long hallway with dark wood floors and a single door at the end. Eleanor walked ahead. Adrian followed. She knocked twice, then opened the door without waiting for an answer. Walter Hayes sat behind a desk that was too large for the room. He was thinner than Adrian remembered, his cheeks hollowed out, his skin carrying a grayish tint that no amount of expensive lighting could hide. His suit jacket hung on him like it belonged to someone else. But his eyes, those hadn't changed. Sharp, calculating the color of winter slate. They locked onto Adrian the moment he stepped through the door. "Adrian Brooks," Walter said. His voice was quieter than the voicemail, but it carried the same weight. "Sit down." Adrian didn't sit. He stood just inside the doorway, his hands at his sides, his feet planted. "I'll stand." Walter studied him. A faint smile crossed his lips, not warm, not cruel, just the expression of a man who was used to measuring people and had just taken Adrian's measurement. "Fair enough." Walter leaned back in his chair. "Do you know why I asked you here? Your daughter says you want to talk. So talk." Eleanor moved to the side of the room, positioning herself between the two men close enough to intervene far enough to observe. She crossed her arms and said nothing. Walter folded his hands on the desk. "I've been watching you for 3 months. Since the day Eleanor brought you onto the Whitfield project. I knew who you were before your first paycheck cleared. And you didn't say anything." "No." "Why?" Walter paused. For the first time, something shifted behind those slate-colored eyes. Not remorse, not exactly. Something closer to recognition. Like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, finally looking down. "Because I wanted to see what you'd do," Walter said. "I wanted to see if you'd figure it out. And when you did, I wanted to see if you'd stay." "I stayed because I have a daughter who needs to eat. I know about your daughter, Sophie, 7 years old, 2nd grade at Maple Hill Elementary. Favorite color is purple. Allergic to strawberries." Adrian's blood went cold. "How do you know that?" "I told you. I've been watching." Adrian took a step forward. His voice dropped to something low and dangerous. "You stay away from my daughter." "Sit down, Adrian. You don't get to say her name. You don't get to know anything about her. You took everything from me. Once you don't get to come near what I built after." Eleanor stepped forward. "Adrian." "No." He turned to her, his eyes burning. "Did you know about this? Did you know he was watching Sophie?" "I didn't. I swear to you I didn't." Adrian looked back at Walter. The old man hadn't flinched, hadn't moved. He just sat there, weathering Adrian's fury the way a rock weathers a wave, patient, immovable, untouched. "I'm not a threat to your daughter," Walter said calmly. "I'm trying to explain something to you, and I need you to listen. You've got 5 minutes. Then sit down, please." The word please landed like a stone in still water. Adrian had never heard Walter Hayes say please. He'd heard him give orders, make demands, deliver verdicts. But never that word. It wasn't in the man's vocabulary. Adrian pulled out the chair and sat. Walter opened a drawer and removed a manila folder. It was thick, worn at the edges, the kind of folder that had been opened and closed 100 times. He placed it on the desk and pushed it toward Adrian. "Open it." Adrian hesitated, then reached for the folder. Inside were documents, dozens of them. Employment records, legal filings, internal memos stamped confidential, and at the very top, a photograph. Adrian's hands went still. It was a photo of him. Younger, clean-shaven, standing in front of the old Hayes Urban Group office on Kensington Boulevard. He was smiling. Maria was beside him, her arm looped through his, her head tilted against his shoulder. The photo had been taken at the company's annual gala in 2018, 1 year before the layoffs. "Where did you get this?" Adrian's voice was barely audible. "It was in your personnel file. I've looked at it more times than I care to admit." "Why?" And Walter leaned forward. His hands were shaking a slight tremor that he tried to hide by pressing them flat against the desk. "Because every time I looked at that photo, I saw what I did. Not the restructuring, not the business decision. I saw what it actually looked like. A man and his wife. Happy. And I'm the one who ended that." Adrian closed the folder. He couldn't look at the photo anymore. Maria's face was too real, too alive, too much a reminder of everything that had been taken. "You didn't just end my career," Adrian said. "You ended my marriage. You ended my wife." "I know. She's dead because of the chain of events you started." Walter closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. "I know that too." The room was silent. Eleanor stood perfectly still, her hand pressed against her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She hadn't known. Adrian could see it, the shock, the horror, the sudden and devastating understanding of what her father's legacy actually looked like when you stripped away the press releases and profit margins. "So, what do you want from me?" Adrian asked. "Forgiveness, absolution. Some kind of deathbed pardon so you can go peacefully." "No." Walter's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "No. I don't deserve forgiveness. I know that." "Then what?" Walter reached into the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He placed it in front of Adrian. "This is a trust document. I've established a fund, $2.4 million in Sophie's name. Full access when she turns 18. Educational expenses covered immediately. It's irrevocable. It can't be taken back." Adrian stared at this paper. The numbers swam before his eyes. "You think you can buy your way out of this?" "I think I can try to do one right thing before I die. That's all I have left." "I don't want your money." "It's not for you. It's for her. It's for the little girl who grew up without a mother because I made a spreadsheet decision in a conference room and never thought about who was on the other end of those numbers." Adrian pushed the paper back across the desk. "No. Adrian? I said no." Walter looked at Eleanor. She looked back at him, and something passed between them, a conversation without words. The kind that only happens between a parent and a child who've spent a lifetime learning each other's silences. "There's something else," Walter said. He pulled another document from the folder. "This is a formal acknowledgement, a written admission of what happened in 2019. The layoffs, the blacklisting, the suppression of complaints. Every detail, signed by me, notarized, ready for public release." Adrian's breath caught. "I'm giving this to you," Walter continued. "You can do whatever you want with it. Take it to the press. File a lawsuit. Use it as leverage. Or burn it. I don't care. But I want you to have the truth in writing from my hand with my name on it." Adrian picked up the document. He read it slowly. Every sentence. Every clause. Every admission that Walter Hayes had spent 7 years burying. It was all there. The deliberate targeting of Adrian's department. The false justifications. The instructions to HR to deny references, the cover-up that followed. His hands were shaking again. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was something else, something he hadn't felt in years. Power. The truth in his hands, signed and sealed after 7 years of silence. He looked up at Walter. "Why now?" "Because I'm dying, and because my daughter." Walter's voice broke. He pressed his fist against his mouth and took a moment. "Because my daughter is falling in love with the man I destroyed, and I can't let that happen without her knowing who I really am." Eleanor let out a sound half-gasp, half-sob. She turned away, pressing her forehead against the wall. Adrian sat very still. The words echoed in his head. Falling in love. He thought about the morning he'd woken up with Eleanor in his bed. He thought about the conference room, the way she'd looked at him when he told her about Maria. He thought about the way his chest tightened every time she walked into a room and how he'd spent 3 months telling himself it meant nothing. It didn't mean nothing. And Walter Hayes, the man who had destroyed him, had seen it before he had. Eleanor, Adrian said quietly. She turned around. Her face was streaked with tears, her composure completely shattered. She looked at him with an expression he recognized, the look of someone standing in the wreckage of everything they thought they knew, trying to find one solid thing to hold on to. "Did you know about any of this?" he asked. "No, I swear to God, Adrian. I didn't know about the trust. I didn't know about the document. I didn't know about—" She gestured at the folder at her father, at all of it. "I brought you here because he asked me to. That's all I knew." Adrian believed her. He didn't know why, maybe because her pain was too raw to be performance. Maybe because he'd spent 7 years learning to read people, and Eleanor Hayes was telling the truth. He turned back to Walter. "I'm not going to make a decision about any of this today." "I understand. I'm going to take these documents. I'm going to have a lawyer look at them, and then I'm going to decide what's right for my daughter. Not for you. Not for your company, not for your conscience, for Sophie." Walter nodded slowly. "That's fair." Adrian stood. He picked up the folder and tucked it under his arm. He looked at Walter Hayes one last time, really looked at him. The thinning frame, the trembling hands, the eyes that had once been steel and were now something closer to glass. This was the man who had haunted him for 7 years. This was the monster in every sleepless night, every empty bank account, every birthday Maria would never see. And now the monster was just a dying old man in an oversized suit trying to outrun his own shadow. Adrian didn't feel pity. He didn't feel satisfaction. He felt something in between, something that didn't have a name yet, but sat heavy in his chest like a stone that had been there so long he'd forgotten it wasn't part of him. "Thank you for your time," Adrian said. And he walked out. Eleanor caught up with him at the elevator. "Adrian, wait." He pressed the button. The doors opened. He stepped inside and turned to face her. "Not now, Eleanor." "When?" "I don't know. I need you to know that I didn't." "I know you didn't. That's not the problem." "Then what is?" The doors began to close. Adrian held them open with one hand. "The problem is that your father just told me his daughter is falling in love with me, and I'm standing here holding proof that he destroyed my life, and I don't know how to hold both of those things at the same time." He let go of the doors. They closed between them. The elevator descended 32 floors. Adrian counted every one. He walked through the garage, got in his car, placed the folder on the passenger seat, and gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He sat there for a long time, longer than he should have, longer than made sense. The garage was quiet, except for the ticking of his engine cooling down and the distant hum of the city above. He pulled out his phone and called Mrs. Patterson. "How's Sophie?" "Happy as a clam. We're making cookies. You want me to save you some?" "Yeah, save me some." "You okay, Adrian? You don't sound right." "I'm fine, Mrs. Patterson. I'll be home in 30 minutes. He hung up and started the car. The drive home felt longer than the drive there. Every stoplight gave him too much time to think. Walter's words circled his mind like birds that wouldn't land. $2.4 million. A signed confession. A dying man's attempt at redemption. And Eleanor standing in that room watching her world crack open, learning that the father she loved had built his empire on the bones of people like Adrian. He parked in front of his apartment and sat for another moment. Through the window, he could see Mrs. Patterson's kitchen light on next door. He could picture Sophie inside flour on her nose laughing about something that only makes sense when you're 7. He grabbed the folder and got out of the car. Inside, Sophie tackled his legs the moment he walked through the door. "Daddy, we made snickerdoodles." "That's amazing, sweetheart." He picked her up, held her tight, and breathed in the smell of sugar and cinnamon in her hair. She was warm and real and perfect, the only thing in his life that hadn't been touched by Walter Hayes. Until now. He set her down and thanked Mrs. Patterson, who gave him a long look on her way out, but said nothing. She'd been around long enough to know when a man needed silence more than advice. Adrian put Sophie to bed early. She didn't fight it. The cookie making had worn her out. He read 2 pages of her book before her eyes closed, and her grip on his wrist went slack. He walked to the kitchen table and sat down with the folder. Yay. He read Walter's confession 3 times. Each time the words hit differently. The first time he felt rage, pure, undiluted, the kind that makes your vision narrow and your teeth clench. The second time he felt grief for Maria, for the years lost, for the man he used to be before Walter Hayes turned him into a survivor. The third time, he felt something unexpected. Clarity. He didn't want revenge. He never had. What he wanted, what he'd always wanted, was acknowledgement. Someone to say, "This happened. It was wrong and it was my fault." Walter Hayes had just given him that, in writing, with his signature. Wow. It didn't undo anything. Maria was still gone. The years of poverty and struggle were still real. Sophie would still grow up without a mother. But the truth was no longer buried. It was sitting on his kitchen table in a manila folder, and for the first time in 7 years, Adrian Brooks felt like the ground beneath his feet was solid. He closed the folder. He picked up his phone. He had 11 unread messages from Eleanor. He read none of them. Instead, he typed a single message and sent it to her. "I'm not angry at you. I need time. Please give me that." Her reply came 20 seconds later. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here." Adrian turned off his phone, leaned back in his chair, and closed his eyes. The apartment was quiet. Sophie was breathing softly down the hall. The refrigerator hummed its steady, familiar song. He sat there in the dark for a long time, holding the weight of everything he'd learned, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like it was crushing him. 3 days passed before Adrian spoke to Eleanor again. 3 days of dropping Sophie at school, sitting at his desk, staring at spreadsheets he couldn't read, eating lunches he couldn't taste, and driving home to an apartment that felt smaller every night. The manila folder sat on top of his refrigerator, tucked behind a cereal box, where Sophie wouldn't find it. He'd moved it there Sunday morning, after catching her reaching for it on the kitchen table. "What's that, Daddy?" "Grown-up stuff." "Is it boring?" "Very boring." She'd lost interest immediately. Children had that gift, the ability to dismiss what didn't concern them and move on. Adrian envied it more than he could say. On Tuesday, Ray Dawson cornered him in the break room. "All right, Brooks, spill it." "Spill what?" "Whatever's been eating you alive for the last 3 days. You've barely said 10 words since Friday. You look like you haven't slept. And Eleanor Hayes has been walking around this office like somebody kicked her dog." Ray leaned against the counter and crossed his arms. "What happened?" Adrian poured his coffee. "Nothing happened." "Bull, something happened between you two, and I'm not blind. Nobody in this building is blind. The way she looks at you, man." "Ray, the way you look at her." "Ray, stop." Ray held up his hands. "Fine, but I'm your friend Adrian, the only one you got in this place far as I can tell. And I'm telling you, whatever you're carrying, it's too heavy for one set of shoulders." Adrian took a sip of his coffee. It was burnt. Everything in this building was burnt: the coffee, the fluorescent lights, the people. He set the cup down and looked at Ray. "If I told you something, could you keep it between us?" "You know I can." "I mean it, not a word, not to anyone." Ray straightened up. The joking was gone from his face. "Adrian, talk to me." Adrian glanced at the break room door, then lowered his voice. Walter Hayes destroyed my career 7 years ago. Before I came here. Before any of this. He gutted my department, blacklisted me, and set off a chain of events that... He stopped. The words stuck in his throat like broken glass. That cost me my wife. Ray stared at him. Your wife who passed? Yeah. And you're working for him now. For his daughter, but yeah. Ray ran a hand over his face. Jesus Christ, Adrian. There's more. He's dying. Cancer. And Saturday, he sat me down and handed me a signed confession. Everything he did, in writing. Why? Because his daughter... Adrian paused. He heard Eleanor's heels clicking somewhere down the hall, the rhythm unmistakable, and he waited until the sound faded. Because Eleanor is... It's complicated. Complicated how? Complicated in the way that a man's boss ends up in his bed on a Friday night, and neither of them remembers how it happened, and then 3 days later, her dying father hands him a folder full of proof that he ruined his life and says his daughter is falling in love with him. That kind of complicated. Ray was quiet for a long time. He picked up Adrian's coffee cup, looked at it, set it back down. You need a lawyer. I know. And a therapist. Probably. And you need to talk to Eleanor. I know that too. So why haven't you? Adrian looked out the break room window. The city stretched below them, indifferent and enormous. Because I don't know what to say. I don't know how to look at her and not see her father. I don't know how to separate the two. And I don't know if I should. Ray put his hand on Adrian's shoulder. Let me ask you something, and I want a real answer, not the one you've rehearsed in your head. Go ahead. Do you have feelings for this woman? Adrian didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence said everything. Ray squeezed his shoulder and walked out. At 4:15 that afternoon, Adrian's office phone rang. He picked it up expecting a client. Adrian, it's Eleanor. Don't hang up. He didn't hang up. He didn't speak either. I've been trying to give you space, she continued. But something's happened, and you need to hear it from me before you hear it from someone else. What happened? My father collapsed this morning. He's in the hospital, Mount Sinai. They're running tests, but his doctor told me... Her voice fractured. She paused, gathered herself, and pushed through. His doctor told me the cancer has spread. It's in his liver now. Adrian closed his eyes. I'm not calling to ask you for sympathy, Eleanor said. I know what he did to you. I've spent 3 days reading through every document in that folder. I made copies before you left Saturday. I needed to know, all of it. And he's worse than I thought. It wasn't just your department. There were others. Other people, other families. He buried all of it. Paid people off sealed records, threatened lawsuits against anyone who spoke up. Her breathing was shaky but controlled. The man I thought I knew. The man who raised me, who taught me to ride a bike, who sat up with me when I had nightmares. He's not who I thought he was. Adrian leaned back in his chair. That's a hard thing to learn about your father. Don't do that. Do what? Be kind to me. Not right now. I don't deserve it. You didn't do anything wrong, Eleanor. I carry his name. I run his company. I've built my entire career on the foundation of what he created, and now I find out that foundation is made of... She stopped. Adrian heard her take a breath that sounded like it hurt. I'm ashamed, Adrian. I'm ashamed of my own blood. You're not your father. Everyone in this city thinks I am. I don't. The line went quiet. Adrian could hear the faint sound of a hospital PA system in the background, a nurse being paged the mechanical hum of a building designed to keep people alive against their will. Come to the hospital, Eleanor said. Why? Because he's asking for you. Again. Eleanor. I know what I'm asking, and I know I have no right. But he says there's something else, Something he didn't tell you on Saturday. Something about that night. Adrian sat up straight. What night? The night I ended up at your apartment. His pulse quickened. What about it? He wouldn't tell me. He said he'll only tell you. Adrian stared at the phone. Every instinct told him to stay away. Walter Hayes was a manipulator, even dying, even broken. The man was still pulling strings. But the mention of that night, the night that Adrian couldn't remember, the night that had started all of this, was a thread he couldn't leave unpulled. What room? Adrian asked. 1412. Give me an hour. He hung up, grabbed his jacket, and stopped at his desk long enough to send a text to Mrs. Patterson asking her to pick up Sophie from school. Then he walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and stepped into a day that was about to crack wide open. The hospital was 20 minutes from the office. Adrian drove in silence. No radio, no phone, no distractions. His mind raced through possibilities. What could Walter know about that night Adrian and Eleanor had both blacked out? The whiskey explained some of it. But there were gaps. How had Eleanor gotten to his apartment? Why had she come? Who had called whom? The 14 missed calls on his phone that morning. He'd never checked whose number they were from. He'd assumed Eleanor's. But now, sitting in a hospital parking garage with the engine cooling, a different thought crept in. What if they were from Walter? Adrian took the elevator to the 14th floor and followed the signs to room 1412. The hallway was quiet. A nurse passed him carrying a tray, gave him a polite nod, and disappeared around a corner. Eleanor was standing outside the room. She looked exhausted, deep circles under her eyes, her hair pulled back in a messy knot, her clothes wrinkled as if she'd been sitting in the same chair for hours. She straightened when she saw him. "He's awake," she said. "But he's weak. I'm not going to yell at a dying man in a hospital bed. That's not what I was going to say." She looked at him with something raw and unguarded. "I was going to say, don't let him manipulate you. He's still my father. He's still good at getting what he wants." Adrian nodded. He pushed open the door and walked in. Walter Hayes looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 days. He was propped up against pillows and IV in his arm monitors, beeping a slow and steady rhythm. His eyes were closed when Adrian entered, but they opened the moment the door clicked shut, sharp alert alive in a way that contradicted everything else about him. "You came faster than I expected," Walter said. "Your daughter said you have something to tell me about that Friday night. Straight to the point. I always liked that about you." "You don't know anything about me." "I know more than you think." Walter shifted in the bed, wincing as he moved. "Sit down. This is going to take a minute." Adrian pulled a chair close to the bed and sat. He didn't cross his arms, didn't lean back, didn't create distance. He sat forward, elbows on his knees, and waited. Walter took a labored breath. "The night Eleanor showed up at your apartment, it wasn't an accident." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I arranged it." Adrian's jaw tightened. "You arranged for your daughter to show up at my home in the middle of the night. Not the way you think. Listen." Walter coughed a wet, rattling sound that came from deep in his chest. He grabbed a tissue, wiped his mouth, and continued. "I've been watching you for 3 months, like I told you, and I've been watching Eleanor for a lot longer than that. She's never looked at anyone the way she looks at you. Never. And I knew that if I didn't do something, she'd spend the rest of her life keeping you at arm's length because she's terrified of anything she can't control. So what set us up? I told her that the Whitfield account had a critical error that needed to be resolved by Monday morning. I told her to find you to work it out together that night. There was no error. The account was fine." Adrian felt the blood drain from his face. "You manufactured a crisis to get your daughter alone with me." "Yes." "And the whiskey?" Walter's expression didn't change. "That was in your desk drawer. You brought that yourself. But you put us in a room together late at night under false pretenses, knowing what would happen." "I didn't know what would happen. I hoped something would. I hoped that if the two of you spent time together, real time, not the stiff professional nonsense you do in meetings, you'd see each other. Really see each other." Adrian stood up so fast, the chair scraped against the floor. "You manipulated your own daughter." I gave her a push. You don't get to decide that for her. You don't get to play God with people's lives, not again. Not after what you did to me. Walter's eyes glistened. I know what I did to you. That's exactly why I did this. What the hell does that mean? It means I owe you a debt I can never repay. I took your wife from you. Not directly, I know that. But the chain of events, the dominoes, I pushed the first one. I've known that for 7 years. And when Eleanor hired you, when I saw her face after your first meeting, I thought maybe this is the one thing I can give back. Maybe this is the one wrong I can make right. By tricking us into spending the night together, by removing the walls she would have built. Eleanor is my daughter. She's brilliant and driven and strong, and she is terrified of vulnerability. She would have kept you at a distance forever. I know because I taught her to do that. I made her that way. And I didn't want her to end up like me, alone in a hospital room, dying with nothing but a folder full of regrets. Adrian pressed his palms against his eyes. His head was pounding. Every time he thought he understood Walter Hayes, the man peeled back another layer, revealing something more complicated, more infuriating, more human. Does Eleanor know? Adrian asked. No. And you can tell her if you want. She'll hate me for it. She probably should. She already hates you. She spent 3 days reading about every person you destroyed. Walter flinched. It was small, a twitch at the corner of his mouth, a tightening around his eyes, but it was real. Good. She should know the truth. Why didn't you tell her years ago? Because I was a coward. Because it's easier to build a legacy than to admit what it cost. Walter's hand trembled as he reached for the water glass on his bedside table. He couldn't grip it. Adrian watched him struggle for 3 seconds, then reached over and held the glass to his lips. Walter drank, nodded, and settled back against the pillows. Thank you, Walter whispered. Adrian set the glass down. He didn't respond to the gratitude. He wasn't ready for that. There's one more thing, Walter said. And this is the part you're not going to like. I haven't liked any of this. That Friday night, after Eleanor left the office to find you, I made a phone call. To your phone. Adrian went still. The 14 missed calls. Those were me. I called to warn you. To tell you that Eleanor was coming, that she didn't know the real reason, that you should be careful. I didn't answer. I know. By the time I stopped calling, it was past 1 in the morning. I figured either you'd fallen asleep or... Walter paused. Or the whiskey had already done its work. Adrian stared at him. So the calls on my phone that morning, they weren't from Eleanor. No. They were from you. Yes. You called me 14 times to warn me about a situation you created. I panicked, Adrian. I set something in motion, and then I realized I couldn't control it. Story of my life. Adrian stood by the window, his back to Walter, his forehead pressed against the cold glass. He could feel the old man's eyes on him, waiting, measuring, calculating. Even now, even from a hospital bed, Walter Hayes was always calculating. I need to ask you something, Adrian said without turning around. And I need the truth. Go ahead. Did anything happen between me and Eleanor that night? Do you know? Walter was quiet for a long time. The monitors beeped. The IV dripped. No, Walter said finally. I don't believe anything happened. When I couldn't reach you, I called Eleanor's phone. She answered at 2 a.m., slurring, half asleep. She said you'd both been talking for hours, that you'd told her about Maria, that she'd cried, that you'd both fallen asleep on your couch. She said you were a gentleman, Adrian. Even drunk, even hurt, even with every reason in the world to let go, you were decent. That's the word she used. Decent. Adrian's throat closed. He pressed his forehead harder against the glass and felt the cold seep into his skin like absolution. She moved to the bed because the couch hurt her back. Walter added quietly, You stayed on the couch. She told me that. I believe her. Adrian turned around. His eyes were red but dry. He looked at Walter Hayes, this hollowed-out shell of a man who had destroyed lives and built empires and manipulated his own daughter's heart, and he felt something he hadn't expected. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever. But something adjacent to it. Something that lived in the same neighborhood, on a street he hadn't walked down in years. Understanding. The understanding that Walter Hayes was not a monster. He was a man flawed, desperate, dying who had spent his whole life making decisions for other people, and was only now at the very end beginning to see the wreckage those decisions left behind. "I'm going to tell Eleanor everything," Adrian said. "All of it. The manufactured crisis, the phone calls, the setup, all of it." "I know. She's going to be furious." "I know that too. And I'm not going to protect you from it." Walter closed his eyes. "I wouldn't ask you to." Adrian walked toward the door. He stopped with his hand on the handle. "The trust fund for Sophie," he said. "I'm not accepting it." Walter's eyes opened. "Adrian." "But I'm not refusing it either. Not yet. I need to think. I need to figure out what's right, not for you, not for me, for her." Walter nodded slowly. "That's all I ask." Adrian opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Eleanor was leaning against the wall, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes searching his face the moment he appeared. "What did he say?" Adrian looked at her. This woman who had woken up in his bed 4 days ago, who carried her father's name like a crown and a curse, who was standing in a hospital hallway waiting for a truth that was about to break her heart. "Not here," he said. "Let's go somewhere we can talk." "Adrian, you're scaring me." "I know, I'm sorry, but you need to hear this, and you need to hear all of it." She pushed off the wall and fell into step beside him. They walked down the corridor together, their footsteps out of sync, the distance between them measured not in feet, but in years of pain and secrets, and a love that neither of them had asked for, but couldn't seem to escape. They reached the elevator. Adrian pressed the button. The doors opened. They stepped inside. Eleanor reached for his hand. Her fingers were cold. Adrian held on. They drove to a diner 3 blocks from the hospital. Adrian chose it because it was the kind of place where nobody looked at you twice. Vinyl booths, bad lighting, coffee that tasted like it had been sitting since morning. He needed ordinary. He needed a place where the conversation they were about to have wouldn't echo off marble floors and glass walls. Eleanor slid into the booth across from him. She hadn't spoken since the elevator. Her hands were clasped on the table, her knuckles white. Her eyes fixed on Adrian's face with the focus of someone bracing for impact. A waitress came by. Adrian ordered 2 coffees. Eleanor didn't object. "Talk to me," Eleanor said the moment the waitress walked away. Adrian folded his hands. He'd spent the entire drive rehearsing this, how to say it, where to start, how much to reveal. But now, sitting across from her, watching the fear play across her features, he threw out every rehearsed line and went with the only thing he had left. The truth. "That Friday night, the night you ended up at my apartment, your father set it up." Eleanor blinked. "What?" "Eleanor. The Whitfield account. The critical error he told you about. It didn't exist. He made it up. He told you to find me to work with me that night because he wanted us alone together." Eleanor sat perfectly still. She didn't breathe. She didn't blink. She just stared at him, as if the words were a foreign language she was trying to translate. "That's not—" She shook her head. "That doesn't make sense. He called me that afternoon. He said the numbers were off. He said if we didn't fix it by Monday, we'd lose the account." "There was nothing to fix. He admitted it to me 20 minutes ago, in his hospital bed. He looked me in the eye and told me he manufactured the whole thing." The coffees arrived. Neither of them touched their cups. "Why?" Eleanor's voice was barely above a whisper. "Why would he do that?" "Because he saw how you looked at me. His words, not mine. He said you'd never looked at anyone that way. And he knew because of who he is, because of how he raised you, that you'd never act on it. He said you were too controlled, too afraid of vulnerability. So he created a situation where the walls would come down. Eleanor pressed her fingers against her lips. Her eyes were filling with tears, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. She was holding on with everything she had. He played me, she said. He played both of us. And the phone calls on your phone that morning, the 14 missed calls, those were from him, not from you. He called me to warn me that you were coming, but by the time he started calling, we were already... Adrian paused. We were already talking. On the couch. The whiskey was open. Neither of us heard the phone. Eleanor pulled her hands off the table and pressed them flat against her thighs, out of sight. Adrian recognized the gesture. She was trying to stop them from shaking. What else did he tell you? He called your phone at 2 in the morning. You answered. You were half asleep, slurring. You told him we'd been talking for hours, that I told you about Maria, that you cried, that we both fell asleep on the couch. Adrian paused. You told him nothing happened between us, that I was decent. A tear broke free and slid down Eleanor's cheek. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, fast, angry, like the tear itself was a betrayal. I remember now, she said quietly. Pieces of it. I remember sitting on your couch. I remember you talking about her, about Maria. Your voice. The way it sounded when you said her name. Like you were holding something made of glass. She looked down at the table. I remember crying. I don't remember why. I think you cried because you understood. Understood what? That your father did that to me. You didn't know the specifics yet, but you felt it. You felt the weight of it. Eleanor closed her eyes. When she opened them, the tears were gone, replaced by something harder. Something that looked like fury. He manipulated me my entire life, she said. Every decision, every relationship, every job I've taken, every path I've walked, he's been behind it, steering, controlling. And I let him because I thought he knew best. I thought he was protecting me. Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. He wasn't protecting me. He was managing me. Like an asset. Like a project. Eleanor. And this, she gestured between them. This thing between us, whatever it is, he manufactured that too. He decided I should fall for you. He decided you should be in my life. He took away my choice. No, he didn't. She looked at him sharply. How can you say that? Because he arranged the circumstances. He didn't arrange the feelings. The circumstances got us in the same room. What happened in that room, the talking, the honesty, the connection, that was us. He can't manufacture that. Nobody can. Eleanor stared at him. Something shifted behind her eyes, a softening, a crack in the armor she'd been rebuilding since the moment he started talking. How are you so calm about this? She asked. I'm not calm. I'm furious. I've been furious for 7 years. But I've learned something about fury, Eleanor. It doesn't burn the person it's aimed at. It burns the person carrying it. And I'm tired of being on fire. Man. She reached across the table. Her fingers found his wrist. Not his hand, his wrist. She pressed her thumb against his pulse, as if she needed proof that he was real, that this was happening. That they were two people sitting in a diner having the most important conversation of their lives. What do we do now? She asked. I don't know. That's not good enough. It's all I have. She pulled her hand back. I'm going to confront him. I figured. Tonight. As soon as I leave here, I'm going back to that hospital, and I'm going to look my father in the face and tell him what he's done. Not just to you, to me, to everyone. Eleanor, he's dying. I know he's dying. That doesn't give him the right to rearrange people's lives from his deathbed. That doesn't earn him a pass. She leaned forward, her voice low and hard. My whole life, everyone around him has given him a pass. His board, his lawyers, his executives. Everyone nods and smiles and looks the other way because he's Walter Hayes and he built this city's skyline. Well, I'm done looking the other way. I'm done. Adrian watched her. The fire in her eyes was real. Not the controlled professional flame she showed in conference rooms, but something wild and personal and dangerous. He'd seen that look before, in the mirror, 7 years ago. "Be careful," he said. "Why?" "Because when you confront a man like your father, you don't just change the conversation. You change the relationship, permanently. And once it's changed, you can't go back." "Maybe I don't want to go back." "Maybe, but you might. One day, after he's gone, and by then it'll be too late." Eleanor sat back. She picked up her coffee for the first time and took a sip. It was cold. She drank it anyway. "You sound like you're speaking from experience," she said. "I am. Maria and I, the last conversation we had before she left, I said things I can't take back. Things that were true, but shouldn't have been said the way I said them. And now she's gone. And those words are the last ones she heard from me. I live with that every single day." Eleanor set down the cup. Her expression changed, the fury draining out, replaced by something gentler. Something that looked like recognition. "What did you say to her?" "I told her she was a coward for leaving. I told her she was abandoning Sophie. I told her that if she walked out that door, she was no different from every person who'd ever given up on us." Adrian's voice was steady, but his hands beneath the table were gripping his knees hard enough to leave marks. She walked out anyway. And 6 months later, she was dead. And the last thing I ever said to my wife was that she was a coward. The diner was quiet. A truck rumbled past outside. The waitress refilled someone's coffee 2 booths away. "I'm not telling you not to confront your father," Adrian said. "I'm telling you to choose your words carefully. Because they might be the last ones he hears." Eleanor pressed both palms flat against the table and stood up. She looked down at Adrian with an expression that held a dozen emotions at once: anger, grief, gratitude, love, confusion, determination. "Come with me," she said, "to the hospital. I need you there, not to speak, not to intervene, just to be there." "Eleanor, this is between you and your father." "No, it stopped being between me and my father the moment he dragged you into it. You're part of this now, Adrian, whether either of us wanted it or not." "Mao." Adrian looked at her, standing there in a wrinkled dress, her eyes red, her jaw set, her hands still trembling. She looked nothing like the polished executive who ran department meetings with surgical precision. She looked like a woman standing at the edge of something she couldn't see the bottom of, asking the one person she trusted to stand next to her while she jumped. He stood up, put a $10 bill on the table, walked with her to the door. They drove back to the hospital in her car. Adrian sat in the passenger seat, his hands in his lap, watching the city pass by. Eleanor drove fast, too fast, her knuckles tight on the wheel, her jaw clenched. "Slow down," Adrian said. "I'm fine. You're doing 80 in a 45. She eased off the gas. Barely. They parked, walked through the lobby, took the elevator to the 14th floor. Neither of them spoke. The silence between them was different now, not the heavy, uncertain silence of the morning at his apartment, but something charged and electric, like the air before a storm. Eleanor pushed open the door to room 1412 without knocking. Walter was awake. He turned his head and saw them both, his daughter, and the man whose life he'd destroyed, standing side by side in his doorway. Something crossed his face. Not surprise, not fear. Something closer to inevitability, like a man who'd been waiting for a wave and finally saw it on the horizon. "Eleanor," he said. "Don't." She held up her hand. "Don't say my name like that. Like everything's normal. Like you didn't sit in this bed 2 hours ago and tell Adrian that you engineered the night I showed up at his apartment." Walter's eyes moved to Adrian. "You told her." She deserved to know. "I wasn't going to hide it," Walter said. "I was going to tell her myself." "When?" Eleanor's voice cut through the room like a blade. "When were you going to tell me, Dad? After another 3 months of watching us from your corner office, after another manufactured crisis, after you'd pushed us close enough together that I couldn't pull away without losing something. Eleanor, sit down. I will not sit down. She moved closer to the bed, her body rigid, her fists clenched at her sides. I spent my whole life trusting you. Every decision I made, I ran it through you first. Every relationship, every career move, every choice that mattered, I brought it to you, because I believed you had my best interest at heart. And now I find out that you've been moving me around like a chess piece, not just now, my whole life. Walter's face crumbled. The steel was gone. The calculation was gone. What remained was raw and broken and old, a dying man watching his daughter look at him with disgust for the first time. Everything I did, he started, was for yourself. Don't dress it up. Don't tell me it was for my own good. You destroyed 43 people's lives because it was convenient. You destroyed Adrian's marriage. His wife died dad. She's dead. And you sat on that information for 7 years. You watched me hire the man you ruined, and you said nothing. You watched me fall for him, and instead of telling me the truth, you manipulated us both into a situation where the truth would come out on your terms. Everything is always on your terms. Walter's hands were shaking. The tremor was worse than before. Not the subtle twitch Adrian had seen on Saturday, but a visible, uncontrollable shaking that traveled up his arms and into his shoulders. I was trying to fix it, Walter whispered. You can't fix it. Eleanor's voice dropped. The fury was still there, but beneath it something else was surfacing, grief raw and bottomless. You can't fix a dead woman. You can't fix a child who grew up without her mother. You can't fix Adrian's 7 years of pain. And you can't fix what you've done to me by trying to arrange my love life from your deathbed. I know I can't fix it. That's why I gave him the documents. That's why I set up the trust fund for Sophie. That's why... The trust fund. Eleanor laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that didn't belong in a hospital room. You think money fixes this? You think writing a check and signing a confession makes it right? No, I think it's all I have left to give. What about the truth, the full truth? Not the sanitized version you gave Adrian on Saturday. Not the carefully curated confession. The real truth. All of it. Walter closed his eyes. The monitors beeped. The IV dripped. The room held its breath. What do you want to know? He asked. Were there others besides Adrian's department? Silence. Dad? Were there others? Yes. Eleanor pressed her fist against her mouth. Adrian watched her from the doorway, his arms at his sides, every muscle in his body tense. How many? Eleanor asked. 3 other departments, over the course of 5 years, different divisions, different cities, same approach. Walter opened his eyes. They were wet and hollow. I told myself it was business. I told myself the numbers justified it. I told myself that the people would recover, that they'd find other jobs, that the market would absorb them. I told myself whatever I needed to hear so I could sleep at night. And did you sleep at night? Not once, not in 7 years. Eleanor turned away from the bed. She walked to the window and stood there with her arms wrapped around herself, her shoulders heaving. Adrian could hear her crying, quiet, controlled sobs that she was fighting to contain. He moved toward her, not close enough to touch, just close enough so she knew he was there. Eleanor, he said softly. She didn't turn around. I need a minute. Take your time. She stood at the window for a long time, 2 minutes, maybe 3. When she turned around, her face was wet, but her eyes were clear. She'd made a decision. Adrian could see it in the set of her jaw, the straightness of her spine, the way her hands had stopped shaking. She walked back to her father's bed and looked down at him. Here's what's going to happen, she said. Her voice was steady, not cold, not warm, just steady. On Monday morning, I'm calling an emergency board meeting. I'm presenting Adrian's documents, the full confession, every detail. I'm going to propose a comprehensive review of every restructuring decision made under your leadership. Every department, every city, every person affected. Eleanor, the board won't. I'm not finished. I'm also proposing the creation of a restitution fund, not just for Adrian, for everyone. Every person who was laid off without notice, blacklisted, silenced. The company is going to acknowledge what happened publicly, and it's going to make it right. Or as right as money and honesty can make it. Walter stared at her. The board will fight you. Let them. They'll try to remove you. Let them try. Eleanor, you'll lose everything I built for you. You didn't build it for me. You built it for yourself. And you built it on top of people. Real people with families and mortgages and children. And I won't run a company that stands on that foundation. Not anymore. The room went quiet. Walter looked at Adrian. Adrian looked back. Something passed between them. Not peace, not understanding, but acknowledgement. The acknowledgement that Eleanor Hayes was no longer a daughter standing in her father's shadow. She was a woman standing in her own light, and the shadow was behind her. Adrian, Walter said. Yeah. Will you support her? Adrian looked at Eleanor. She was watching him, waiting not for permission, not for validation, but for something simpler. Partnership. Someone to walk beside her into the fire. I already do, Adrian said. Eleanor's eyes filled again. She nodded once, a small, tight nod that held more gratitude than words could carry. She turned back to her father, leaned down, pressed her lips against his forehead, a gesture so tender and so conflicted that it made Adrian's chest ache. I love you, Dad, she whispered, but I have to do this. Walter reached up and touched her face with his trembling hand. I know you do. You're braver than I ever was. Eleanor straightened. She took a breath. She turned and walked toward the door. Adrian lingered for a moment. He looked at Walter, the man who had taken everything from him, who had manipulated his daughter, who had tried to buy redemption with a trust fund and a confession. The man who was dying alone in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and regret. For what it's worth. Adrian said quietly, You raised a good woman. Walter's lip trembled. He pressed his hand over his eyes and turned his face toward the wall. Adrian walked out. Eleanor was waiting in the hallway, leaning against the wall, her eyes closed, her chest rising and falling with deep, deliberate breaths. Adrian stood beside her. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. They just stood there side by side in a hospital corridor that hummed with fluorescent light and distant footsteps. After a long time, Eleanor opened her eyes and looked at him. Monday is going to be the hardest day of my life, she said. I know. Will you be there? Yeah, I'll be there. She reached for his hand. He took it. Her fingers laced through his warm, steady certain. They stood like that for a while, holding on, saying nothing. Two people who had been brought together by a dying man's guilt, and a Friday night, neither of them remembered standing on the edge of something that felt like the beginning of the rest of their lives. Adrian's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with his free hand. Mrs. Patterson. Sophie wants to know if you're bringing pizza home. He typed back with one thumb. Tell her yes. Extra cheese. He put the phone away and held Eleanor's hand a little tighter. Monday came like a freight train. Adrian was up at 5. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours. He'd spent most of the night sitting at the kitchen table with the manila folder open in front of him, reading Walter's confession for what felt like the 100th time, memorizing the language, the dates, the names, making sure that when the moment came, he could speak to it without flinching. Sophie wandered into the kitchen at 6:15, rubbing her eyes. Daddy, you're up early. Big day at work, sweetheart. Are you nervous? He looked at her. 7 years old and already reading him like a book. Maria's eyes, Maria's instincts, the one piece of his wife that was still alive and walking around in the world. A little bit, he admitted. Mrs. Patterson says when you're nervous you should take 3 big breaths and think about something that makes you happy. Yeah, what makes you happy? Pancakes. Adrian laughed. It was the first real laugh he'd had in days, and it came out of him like air from a balloon, sudden, uncontrolled, necessary. Pancakes it is, he said, and he made them breakfast. He braided her hair the way Maria used to, the way he'd learned from a YouTube video 3 years ago after Sophie came home from school crying because all the other girls had braids and she didn't. He packed her lunch peanut butter and jelly apple slices, 2 cookies he'd hidden from her the night before. He walked her to Mrs. Patterson's door and knelt down to her level. I might be late tonight, he said. How late? I don't know. But I'll be home, I promise. She hugged him around the neck tight and fierce, the way only a child can hug with her whole body, her whole heart, without holding anything back. Adrian closed his eyes and breathed her in. Sugar and shampoo, and something indefinably Sophie. I love you, Daddy. I love you more. Impossible. He kissed her forehead and stood up. Mrs. Patterson was watching from her doorway, with the look she always wore when she saw them together, a mixture of tenderness and something like awe, as if she'd never quite gotten used to watching a man love his daughter that completely. Knock 'em dead, Mrs. Patterson said. That's the plan. He drove to the office with the folder on the passenger seat. His phone buzzed at a red light. Eleanor board meeting is set for 9 a.m. Conference room A. I've already sent the agenda. Are you ready? Adrian typed back. Are you? Her reply came immediately. No. Come anyway. He parked in the garage and took the elevator to the 14th floor. The office was already humming phones, ringing keyboards, clicking the low murmur of people who had no idea what was about to happen. Ray Dawson intercepted him at the elevator. Brooks, what's going on? Eleanor just called an emergency board meeting. Nobody knows what it's about. HR is freaking out. You'll find out at 9. Ray grabbed his arm. Adrian, level with me. Is this about what you told me about Walter? Adrian looked at him. Yeah, it is. Are you going to be okay? Ask me at 10. Ray let go of his arm and stepped back. Whatever happens in that room, I've got your back. You hear me? I hear you. Adrian walked to conference room A. Eleanor was already inside, standing at the head of the long mahogany table, arranging documents in neat stacks. She looked up when he entered. She was wearing a dark navy suit, no jewelry, no excess, nothing ornamental. War clothes. She'd pulled her hair back tight the way she always did when she meant business, but her eyes told a different story. They were red-rimmed and exhausted and absolutely resolute. Close the door, she said. He closed it. The board members will be here in 20 minutes, 8 of them. 3 are loyal to my father, 2 are neutral, 3 I can count on. She placed her hands flat on the table and leaned forward. I need you to understand something, Adrian. When I present those documents, when I read that confession out loud in front of those people, everything changes. For me, for the company, for you. There's no going back. I know. They might come after you. They might argue that you have a personal vendetta, that you're using me to get revenge on my father. Let them argue. They might fire me. They'd be stupid to fire you. They might fire you. Adrian pulled out a chair and sat down. He placed the manila folder on the table in front of him. Eleanor, I've been fired before. I've been broke before. I've been at the bottom before. The only thing I haven't been is silent. And I'm done being silent. She looked at him with something that went beyond gratitude, beyond admiration, beyond whatever professional distance still existed between a VP and her project lead. She looked at him the way you look at someone who's standing next to you in a foxhole, not because they have to, but because they chose to. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet. The board members arrived in clusters. Adrian recognized most of them from company events. Men and women in expensive clothes with expensive watches, and the kind of practiced composure that comes from decades of boardroom politics. They filed in, took their seats, exchanged glances. Nobody knew why they were here. The tension was immediate. Richard Calloway, the longest-serving board member and Walter's closest ally, sat directly across from Eleanor. He was 70, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and he carried himself with the quiet menace of a man who had survived every corporate coup in the company's 30-year history. "Eleanor," Calloway said, folding his hands on the table. "This is unusual. Emergency meetings are reserved for crises. Is there a crisis?" "Yes," Eleanor said. "There is." She stood. She picked up the first stack of documents and passed them around the table. Adrian watched 12 copies of Walter's confession circulate through the room. He watched faces change confusion first, then concern, then varying shades of alarm. "What you're holding," Eleanor said, "is a signed, notarized confession from my father, Walter Hayes, detailing the systematic and deliberate elimination of 4 departments across 3 cities over a 5-year period. These were not standard restructurings. They were targeted purges executed without notice, followed by blacklisting campaigns designed to prevent affected employees from finding work elsewhere." The room went dead silent. Calloway was the first to speak. "Where did you get this?" "My father gave it to me, voluntarily. He's currently in Mount Sinai Hospital with stage 3 pancreatic cancer that has metastasized to his liver." Murmurs around the table. Calloway's expression didn't change. "And who is this?" Calloway gestured toward Adrian. "Adrian Brooks, project lead on the Whitfield account, and one of the people my father's decisions directly destroyed." "Yes, sir." Every eye in the room turned to Adrian. He felt the weight of their stares, some curious, some hostile, some calculating. He didn't flinch. He'd spent 7 years being invisible. He was done with that. "Mr. Brooks," Calloway said slowly, "are you the one who brought these documents to Eleanor?" "No. Walter Hayes gave them to me directly, in person, last Saturday." "And your relationship with Eleanor, is it professional?" Adrian felt the trap being set. Calloway was sharp. He was already looking for a way to discredit the whole thing by framing it as a personal agenda. "My relationship with Eleanor is irrelevant to the contents of those documents," Adrian said. "What's relevant is that your founder and CEO signed a confession admitting to illegal blacklisting, retaliatory termination practices, and systematic cover-ups. That's not about me. That's about every person in that folder, and every person who's going to ask why this board didn't act when it had the chance." Calloway's jaw tightened. He looked at Eleanor. "This is a serious accusation, against your own father." "It's not an accusation. It's a confession, signed by the man himself. I'm not here to accuse anyone. I'm here to propose a path forward." "Which is?" Eleanor straightened. She placed both hands on the table and looked around the room at every face, every pair of eyes, every person who held power in this company. "I'm proposing a full independent review of every restructuring decision made under my father's leadership. I'm proposing the creation of a restitution fund to compensate affected employees and their families. And I'm proposing a public acknowledgement, not a press release written by lawyers, not a vague corporate apology. A real acknowledgement, with names, with specifics, with accountability." The room erupted. 3 board members started talking at once. Calloway raised his hand for silence, and remarkably, he got it. "Eleanor." Calloway said, his voice measured and cold. "What you're proposing would expose this company to billions in liability. Lawsuits, regulatory investigations, stock collapse. You're asking us to burn down the house your father built." "I'm asking us to rebuild it on honest ground. Your father built this company from nothing. My father built this company on the backs of people he discarded, and I will not lead an organization that profits from that." Eleanor's voice didn't waver. Not once. "The board can vote to accept my proposal or reject it. If you reject it, I'll resign. effective immediately. And I'll take these documents to the press, the SEC, and every regulatory body that will listen. Silence. Adrian watched Calloway's face. The old man was calculating running scenarios, measuring risks, weighing survival against exposure. It was the same calculation Walter Hayes had made 7 years ago in a different conference room with different numbers, but the same cold arithmetic. "You'd destroy your own family's legacy," Calloway said. "My family's legacy is already destroyed. I'm just the first one to say it out loud." Calloway looked around the table. The other board members looked back at him, some defiant, some frightened, some resigned. The power dynamics in the room had shifted. Eleanor Hayes, 34 years old, standing at the head of a table full of people twice her age, had just drawn a line in the sand and dared them to cross it. "I'd like to call a recess," Calloway said. 30 minutes. "You have 15?" Eleanor replied. The board members filed out. Adrian and Eleanor stood alone in the conference room. She was shaking her whole body, trembling with the adrenaline that had carried her through the presentation and was now crashing through her system with nowhere to go. "You did it," Adrian said. "I haven't done anything yet. They could vote me down. They could fire me. Calloway could call my father's lawyers and have the whole thing buried by lunch. He won't." "How do you know?" "Because you just told a room full of powerful people that you'd rather burn it all down than live a lie. That's not something people forget, and it's not something they can ignore." Eleanor sat down heavily in her chair. She pressed her palms against her eyes and took 3 deep breaths. The same 3 breaths Mrs. Patterson had prescribed for nervousness, the same ones Sophie had relayed that morning. Adrian almost smiled. "Adrian, yeah, whatever happens today, whatever the board decides, I need you to know something." "What?" She lowered her hands and looked at him. Her eyes were raw, her defenses completely down, the last of her professional armor, lying in pieces on the conference room floor. "I'm not doing this because my father told me to. I'm not doing it because I feel guilty. I'm doing it because it's right, and because you showed me what right looks like." "I didn't show you anything, Eleanor. You already knew. You just needed someone to stand next to you while you said it." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and took his hand. "Stay," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." The board returned in 12 minutes. Calloway sat down, adjusted his tie, and looked at Eleanor. "The board has discussed your proposal. We have conditions." "Name them." "The independent review will be conducted by an outside firm, no one with ties to this company. The restitution fund will be capped at an initial amount to be determined by legal counsel, and the public acknowledgement will be reviewed by the board before release." "Agreed, with one addition." "What?" "Whisk, Adrian Brooks will serve as the liaison between the review committee and the affected employees. He's the only person in this building who understands what those people went through. He'll ensure that the process is fair, transparent, and human." Calloway looked at Adrian. Adrian looked back without blinking. "Agreed," Calloway said. Eleanor nodded. "Then we have a resolution. I'll draft the formal motion by end of day." The board members stood and filed out. Some of them glanced at Adrian as they passed, some with respect, some with suspicion, some with the uncomfortable awareness of people who had just been forced to look at something they'd spent years pretending didn't exist. Ray Dawson was waiting in the hallway. He'd heard everything through the glass walls. His eyes were wide. "Brooks," he said, "what the hell just happened?" "The right thing," Adrian said. "For once." Ray clapped him on the shoulder. "I told you I had your back." "Yeah, you did." Adrian walked back to his desk. He sat down, opened the manila folder one last time, and looked at the photograph. Him and Maria. The gala. 2018. Her arm through his, her head on his shoulder, her smile wide and unguarded, and full of a future she would never see. He touched the edge of the photo with his thumb. "I did it, Maria," he whispered. "I told the truth. Finally." He closed the folder. At 3:15 he picked up Sophie from Mrs. Patterson's house. She ran to him the way she always did, full speed, arms open, crashing into his legs like a small, joyful hurricane. "Did you knock him dead, Daddy?" "I think I did, sweetheart." "Good. Can we get ice cream?" "Yeah, we can get ice cream." They walked to the shop on the corner, Adrian and his daughter hand in hand, moving through a world that looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but felt entirely different. The weight he'd carried for 7 years, the anger, the silence, the shame of being a man who had been broken and had to rebuild himself from nothing, it wasn't gone. It would never be gone entirely, but it was lighter, and for the first time since Maria died, he wasn't carrying it alone. His phone buzzed as Sophie ordered a double scoop of strawberry, then remembered she was allergic and switched to chocolate. "Eleanor. My father wants to see Sophie. He asked me to ask you. No pressure, no agenda. He just wants to meet her." Adrian stared at the message. He looked at Sophie, who was happily destroying a chocolate ice cream cone with the single-minded focus of a 7-year-old on a mission. He typed back, "Not yet, but someday, maybe." Eleanor's reply came a moment later. "That's enough." Adrian put his phone away. Sophie looked up at him, chocolate smeared across her chin, her eyes bright. "Daddy who keeps texting you. A friend. A girlfriend. Just a friend." Sophie grinned a knowing, mischievous grin that was pure Maria. "Daddy's got a girlfriend." "Eat your ice cream." She laughed and went back to her cone. Adrian watched her, this tiny, fierce, impossible person who had given him a reason to get up every morning for 7 years. She didn't know about Walter Hayes. She didn't know about the manila folder, or the board meeting, or the restitution fund with her name on it. She didn't know that her father had spent the last week walking through fire and had somehow come out the other side still standing. All she knew was that it was Monday, and she had ice cream, and her daddy was smiling. And for right now, for this one ordinary, extraordinary moment, that was everything. Adrian sat down on the bench beside her, stretched his legs out, and tilted his face toward the late afternoon sky. The air was warm. Sophie's laughter floated up around him like music. Somewhere across the city, Eleanor Hayes was drafting a document that would change her family's company forever. Somewhere in a hospital bed, Walter Hayes was lying in the quiet, listening to the monitor's beep, wondering if the world he was leaving behind would be better than the one he'd built. And right here on a bench outside an ice cream shop, a single father held his daughter's sticky hand and let himself believe for the first time in 7 years that the best part of his life wasn't behind him. It was just beginning.